place-based lesson plan. I have chosen to do geography for grade 4, and it would be places and regions, and we would focus in on ecosystems and their area's ecosystems, so whatever town we are in. And they would be able to look between two different maps, so one from the 1900s and one from like recent years, to see a different time frame, I guess, of 100 years, to see how the area has changed. I think it would be really fun for them to learn how their area has improved or how their area has been totally affected by a change in population, a change in weather, a change in whatever happened. So I think it would be really fun for them to learn. They would be able to assess and analyze a map and how the maps are different. They will also be able to point out and locate their town on a state map. So whatever state we're in, they'll be able to locate their town using latitude and longitude, which they have already learned about. They will be assessed informally with an oral presentation at the end from designing their own map, and then they will also be assessed on their guided worksheet and how much they have completed and if they work together in their groups. So to start off the lesson, they would be given a PowerPoint that has like vocab that they've never learned, so probably ecosystems, probably era. It's one of those confusing ones, so we would work on it. And then they would also be moved into pictures, so they would show different pictures of maybe from like the 1900s, how the area looked, to now and how it's different, and then they'll be able to analyze and point out their differences if they needed to. They will also be given a book to read, which will be read by the teacher out loud, and the book is called Me on a Map, and it shows how a student in the book is being pointed out on a map and why it's important to learn how to read a map and why it's important for them to understand what a map is. So I think that's a great way to lead into their activity and why it's important for them to understand. And then we would lead into the activity, which is the different maps. So their first portion of their activity is their map, pointing out the differences in the maps and using the guided worksheet together in their table groups. Sometimes if the group is too big, maybe like 5 or 6, I would have them split into smaller groups. It just depends on how many kids we have, and if we need to work around that, we can. But I plan on having them in groups of like 4 or 5. And they would work together to solve the questions and answer them, and when they're done they can turn it into their bin labeled social studies, and then they would move on to making their own map of their area and what's important for them to incorporate on their map and what they've decided to leave off, which leads into their oral presentation. So they will explain why they kept it and why they didn't keep what they wanted, and I think that's a great way for them to understand and also have like a legend so they understand that too. This is important because maps are around us every day. We just don't understand it, whether it's on our GPS on our phone or if it's like in a map hanging in a classroom. It's important to understand how to read, just in case technology does go awry and you do have this map in your car. You would be able to understand how to read it and figure out your way. It's not one of those dying fads, I guess. We always will need a map in our life. We always need to understand how to read it because it's so important and it's around us all the time. And if they don't understand it, then they can't do most of the things that they need to. Students just need to know how to read a map. It's just very important. I guess their skills is reading a map, and reading a map is hard. Doing latitude, longitude, figuring out which way is what. Knowing your direction is very important. North, south, east, west. It's very important. Every day I forget which way I'm facing, so it's important because if you know where north is, you know where south is, you know where east is, you know where west is, and you'll be able to solve and figure out your way around. So giving them direction, that's also important. So they'll be able to know that. They will also, it's an important place in this lesson because we're learning about the regions, we're learning about the states, we're learning about the United States as a whole. So where does Oregon lie? Where does New York lie? Like which part of the United States is it? In the east, west, north, south, midwest? Knowing the regions and knowing your direction and knowing where on the map it's located is very important for them, so then they can solve and figure out where that is. Developing this lesson was very hard. It took a lot of practicing and a lot of, oh, is this really what I want them to do? Is this really where I want them to be do they need to know a map from like the 1900s to a map to today? And it's very important because a map has changed over the years, and you can't just focus on one from this year. You can't focus on one from a couple of years back. You got to go back and back because some of these maps are so outdated that they have different abilities and they have different wording, they have different how their placement is. It's just very different. So if you can read a map from the 1900s, you might be able to read a map from the 2000s. It just might look a little different, but at least you have that skill set in your mind, and you're able to work on it, and you're able to expand on it, and you're able to keep working with it. So I think it's very important for them to learn because we are so surrounded by maps, and it's so important. So that's why this lesson was difficult to portray and difficult to, write about, but it's also very important into this lesson.